Hello again and welcome back to our course on PowerPoint 2013. Earlier on in the course we looked at inserting tables into slides in PowerPoint 2013, and as an example we created this table showing the number of MPs representing each of the major parties in the UK Parliament. As an alternative to showing numeric data in a table, we can show numeric data in the form of a chart or graph. And in this section we're going to look at presenting this same data but in chart form. One important point to realize when you are inserting charts into PowerPoint 2013 presentations is that the charting that is used in the software is based on the charting from Microsoft Excel by default. And what I'm going to demonstrate in this section relies on the fact that you also have Excel 2013 installed as well as PowerPoint 2013. Now, if you don't have Excel installed as well, your approach to charting needs to be slightly different. Most of what you'll see in this section will appear to work in exactly the same way, but you need to set up a way of establishing the data. That's outside the scope of this course, so for the rest of this section I'm assuming that you also have Excel installed as part of your Microsoft Office 2013 installation. So first of all, insert a new slide just with title and content. Enter a title. Now of course earlier on I may have taken the opportunity to adjust the size of the placeholders on this slide, either as an individual slide or on the slide master or on the layout master, but I'm going to put my chart just in the placeholder here as it is. If I hover over the placeholder, the top middle option there is Insert Chart, so I click on that. Now there are several different types of chart available in PowerPoint 2013. If you're used to using Excel, you've got pretty much the same selection, and I'm not going to go into great detail here of why you would use each type of chart, but let me just choose one or two of them and point out one or two features of this Insert Chart dialog. One important thing to bear in mind is that if you change your mind about the choice of chart, it's generally very straightforward to change the chart type later on. You certainly don't have to start again. One of the very popular formats of chart is a column chart, and I'll show you what our data looks like as a column chart later on. Column is selected here on the left, and then the subtypes are along the top here. Now with these subtypes, they each have a name. As you hover over it, you'll see a screen tip with the name. So there's a 100% stacked column, a 3D clustered column, a 3D stacked column, and so on. And if you want to preview one of those, you just click on it to see the type of chart it is. Closely related to column charts are bar charts, which pretty much show the same sort of data but pointing horizontally instead of vertically. And again, there are quite a few subtypes for bar charts. One of the most straightforward and common types of chart you'll see is a pie chart. These are very often used in PowerPoint presentations. You'd specifically use a pie chart when you're showing how something is divided up, how the whole of something is divided up in proportion. And in fact, in relation to the membership of the Houses of Parliament, pie chart here would actually be a good approach, because we're looking at a total of 650 members of Parliament, and this would show how the membership of the main parties is divided up very visually. So I'm going to use the pie chart option. Just before I do, let's look at one or two of the others. A line chart is more of a traditional kind of graph, showing something increasing, decreasing, varying over time. And then you have, for instance, a stock chart, which shows how the values of stocks or shares has varied over a period of time. Now there are various other types of chart, such as radar chart, area chart, and so on. But in this case we're going to go for pie chart. There are some subtypes there, and we'll look at the subtypes after we've created the chart. So the first thing we do is to click on OK. Now this is the point that some people find rather confusing, because what happens is that PowerPoint presents you with a little section of an Excel spreadsheet in effect, and it invites you to enter the data for your chart. Now if I just move this little spreadsheet out of the way for the moment, it's already inserted a chart, and it's inserted a chart with this, let's call it this dummy data. So it's called the chart sales, it's put a title on the top, it's put a legend underneath, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, and it's based on the data that I've got here. Now all you have to do is to change the data here to actually include your real data. So all I would need to do, for example, if I go into the cell that says first quarter first, so click in there and type in there conservative, and then click in the next cell down, notice that already PowerPoint 2013 has replaced the first category name, which was first quarter, with conservative. If I want to actually specify that it's not sales, it's number of MPs, let me just type in here number of MPs. And now I find, if I just move the data out of the way again, that I've got a title that says number of MPs. Now that is not really quite right, as you'll see a little bit later on. But what I'm going to do now is go back into this spreadsheet and type in the rest of the data. There are only 4 categories here, what were originally the 4 quarters of a year. The fact that we have more than 4 categories is not going to be a problem, because PowerPoint will cope with the larger number of categories. So let me type in the rest of this data and I'll join you again in just a moment. So I've entered the rest of the data. If you're not familiar with working with Excel and you're typing data in here, it's a bit awkward. Let me just point out 1 or 2 key things. One of them is that the little sort of spreadsheet you get here tends to be quite small. You can easily make it a bit taller or a bit wider just by dragging on the edges, maybe pull down to make it a slightly bigger sheet, give you a little bit more space to work with. You can similarly pull it to the sides to make it a little bit wider. And for the individual columns, if you take column A here, the first column, which is too narrow to show all of the party names, if you hover over the header, you get the vertical bar with an arrow sticking out either side. Click, drag to the right, you can make a column wider. Similarly for column B, because of the words number of MPs at the top, you need that a little bit wider. So you can give yourself a little bit more working space. When you've finished entering the data, you're going to close this. Now that might be a bit worrying and you think, well, where's my data going to go? But don't worry about it, because PowerPoint keeps your data safe, as we will see in a moment. So close the spreadsheet, and there is the pie chart updated with the data that I entered just now. Now once the chart is in place and selected, you won't be surprised to see that you get a couple of extra tabs on the ribbon. These are the Chart Tools tabs. There's a Design tab and a Format tab. I want to look at the Design tab first. 1 or 2 key things there. If you need to change the data, then the button here, Edit Data, if you click on that, brings back your spreadsheet. So if you need to go in and change the numbers, perhaps break the other category down into more details for the smaller parties, you could do that here and the chart will be updated automatically. When you finish making changes to the data, then close it and you're able to carry on as normal. I mentioned before that it's easy to change chart type. The button on the right of the ribbon on the Design tab in Chart Tools says Change Chart Type. Click that button. Brings up the Change Chart Type dialog. Now it's almost always the case that there are some types of chart that will work with given data and some that won't. Let me just look at the column chart for the data we have here. Let me click on column, and then for a chart type I'm going to use the 3D column, one over on the right there. Gives me a little preview there. Click on OK, and you can see what a difference that makes. It's using exactly the same data, and of course the relative strengths of the parties are indicated by the heights of these columns. I could achieve the same sort of effect maybe using a bar. So what about a clustered bar? Let's see what that does. Click on OK. So it's pretty straightforward to experiment with the different options once you've got the data set up. I'm going to now go back to our pie chart. Still on the Design tab, there is in the middle of that tab a Chart Styles drop down gallery. If I click on the More button there, I can choose from one of the available styles for this particular type of pie chart. So for instance, I could choose that one, which has a lot more depth in the color and so on, and as usual I can go into great detail in formatting and presenting that using different background colors, fill colors, put a border on it and so on. Many of the commands for doing that are on the Format tab, which we'll look at briefly in just a moment. The other important button on the Design tab is right over on the left. That is Add Chart Element. This is where you can add or remove the legend. You can change the chart title. For instance here, the chart title number of MPs, as I mentioned earlier, it's picked that up by default from my spreadsheet. If I wanted to change that, if I hover over chart title, then I can determine whether there's a title at all. So the top option says none, the next one says above chart, the next one said centered overlay, so that the title is actually over the chart slightly. Or if I go into more title options, it gives me a pane, a format chart title pane, with a lot of options for fill, border and so on. So that's a great way that I can go in and really format that chart title with a great deal of precision if indeed I want to. If I just want to change the words, once the chart title is selected, click in there and I can give it a different title, which is what I'm going to do now. And then I just click away and my title is now in place. Now the other Chart Tools contextual tab is the Format tab, and whilst this chart is selected I can use that to set the size of the chart and to do various changes to shape fills, shape outlines, shape effects. I can choose the text style, so a huge range of possibilities there for formatting or reformatting my chart. So I think that gives you a good flavour of what you can do with charts in PowerPoint 2013. Plenty there for you to try, and that leads us to our next example. If you've been working on your own equivalent of my UK Parliament presentation, one for your own government, your company, department, maybe a local club or society you belong to, then I'd like you to add 2 slides to your presentation. If you haven't been doing that, you can use example 8 from the supplied files. And the 2 slides, one of them needs to have a tabular presentation of some data on it, form of a table, and the other one needs to have a graphical presentation of some of the data on it. Doesn't have to be a pie chart, any kind of chart or graph that shows that data is absolutely fine. They don't actually have to be the same samples of data. I've used the same in my answer to this exercise, which is in the supplied files as example 9, and it's actually the data we've been using here during the last 2 sections. So it's the breakdown of MPs by party in the UK House of Commons in January 2013. But before I go, just one other little point that you may find useful. Having produced this slide including a pie chart, not necessarily the final layout that I'd used, but if I go over to the thumbnails here, right click on the thumbnail for this one and just say copy, I can then close this presentation. And now I've opened the presentation that is part of the supplied files, and if I go to say slide 4 there, right click and select one of the paste options, and if I use in particular the one use destination theme, my copied chart appears in the other presentation, in the second presentation, and it uses the theme of that second, the destination presentation. So if you've prepared a slide that you're happy with in one presentation, you want to use it in a different presentation, that's one very straightforward way of doing it. That's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.